Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's broadcast on that focuses on the constitutional, well, basically a court challenge, which I have made to the Quebec Court of Appeal that pertains to Quebec language laws. And I want to bring to attention to everybody listening today is that the intention of my presentation today is to provide everyone who is concerned about the future of Canada, concerned about what they perceive to be as unfairness in our confederation with respect to what's going on in Quebec and how it pertains to a sense of equality in Canada and a sense of freedoms, rights, and responsibilities. This broadcast today is dedicated to all Canadians, all concerned Canadians, whether you're Anglophone, Francophone, of all backgrounds in this great country of ours. The intention of this broadcast today is to give you a perspective of Quebec's language laws as they pertain to my challenge that in terms of the hearing because today I went through a hearing process in which the opponent was trying to challenge my particular right to make a appeal to the Quebec Court of Appeal. So I'm just going to get, so that's what basically the substance of my presentation today, but I'm couching it in the context of Quebec language laws because my petition today, my challenge directly pertained to that. And again, the intent of today is to give Canadians, concerned Canadians, with a perspective that you won't find in, on all our networks. You won't find it in the so-called mainstream media, whether it's the CBC, on the English side, CTV, Global, Montreal Gazette, Epoch Times. You're not going to find what I have to present to you today for everybody who is concerned about the unfairness and the unconstitutionality of Quebec's language laws. Today, I am particularly going to be giving a lucid presentation because I just came from this hearing and experienced complete unfairness by the treatment of my particular case by the Quebec Court of Appeal. And it basically highlights the kind of unfairness that Canadians perceive of the language laws and, the whole treatment of Quebec, of the rights of all Canadians with equality. To give you some background on this, okay, so again, my background, I'm a member of the University of Toronto community. Just to give you my background, you might wonder, who am I? My name is Ray Samuels. My background is that in constitutional law, is that this has been my area of academic focus. Human rights, constitutional law are my professor. The professor I had at the University of Toronto, for example, who inspired me to get in this field, Professor Stéphane Dupré. He was an Order of Canada. He unfortunately passed away, but he was an Order of Canada. And he told us in our first class at the University of Toronto that he has taught multiple Supreme Court justices, including the very venerated Supreme Court Justice Frank Iacobucci, who went on to be one of Canada's most respected judges, who had an unswerving commitment to supporting and recognizing human rights in this country. So my background comes from that perspective, from having an academic background and devoting myself to advocating on behalf of human rights and those areas which pertain to the defense and affirmation of our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Now, the one little known fact that many Canadians in general and even particularly Francophones are not aware of is that the Canadian maple leaf, our Canadian maple leaf that's on the Canadian flag, the origins of the maple leaf is from 1834, the Société de Jean-Baptiste Society. They created the symbol to symbolize their commitment to liberty, equality, and justice for all against what they perceive to be unfairness at the hands of colonial authorities, whether they're the the former authorities of New France, or whether it was British colonial authorities, the maple leaf was a rallying cry to their sense of identity as Canadians of French background. So the maple leaf is, so again, in the current environment, there has been a sense, as portrayed by sovereigntists, that the maple leaf is an Anglo symbol, is an alien, is against French Canada. No, the maple leaf was created by as a French, as is central to the focus historically since 1834 of the Canadian identity. The fleur-de-lis became the official flag of Quebec, became the official flag in 1948, and this flag, which comprises of the fleur-de-lis, which is the symbol of the King of France, and the Virgin Mary to symbol Roman Catholicism. The flag of Quebec, it was a flag which was created and devised in a relatively oppressive environment of Roman Catholicism before the Quiet Revolution in Quebec. So you have in Quebec the symbol of what I would call the elites of Quebec, the sovereigntists who seek to challenge the so-called colonialism of Britain and seek to present the sophistry that the maple leaf is somehow a colonial system of Canada, when in fact the maple leaf is as the most francophone symbol historically, with certain particular values. Now, the values of the fleur-de-lis as a symbol of the King of France, that symbol came out of the Bourbon, was a symbol of the Bourbon monarchy of New France, which was associated to colonialism, oppression, the slave trade, all sorts of the Bourbon regime and France, which France would later rebel against in their French Revolution. The Bourbon regime that's become the symbol of Quebec. It was an autocratic symbol, oppressive to rights, oppressive to freedoms, oppressive to all those values that a majority of Francophones, Anglophones, and other Canadians support in Quebec and the rest of Canada. And somehow this is being the symbol of Quebec against the maple leaf as a supposed symbol of Anglo-colonialism, which is just something which, and this is just completely made up in the minds of Quebec sovereigntists to divide, rule, and conquer Francophones and Anglophones and other Canadians who have a tremendous amount of in common, but these sovereigntists are supporting the politics of divide and rule based upon their symbol of the kings of France, the Virgin Mary, and all the oppressiveness ideology which was associated with the fleur-de-lis and the Roman Catholicism when the Quebec flag was created. So then we get into the whole proceeding today with the Quebec in the Court of Appeal. In the Court of Appeal today, what I experienced was truly shocking and outrageous. Here we have and again, the background of my appeal was that, and this way is how it got to the Quebec Court of Appeal, was that I won a case in the Quebec Human Rights Commission against Ville de Gatineau and the Quebec police officers, including one particular police officer, Officer Sean Mahar, which was found by the Quebec courts to be basically he was sentenced to he had a summary conviction for assault. So, and the Quebec Human Rights Commission, in terms of my case, assigned a variety of these officers punitive damages associated with their, my infringements to my human rights. Well, this went to the Human Rights Tribunal, and then when it went to the Human Rights Tribunal, the judge and the opposing lawyer representing the police decided that they were just going to speak to each other in French and pretend I was not there. And, and I said, I objected to this. I said that I have a right to a free translation services. You can't just all of a sudden start speaking French to each other like I'm not there and stuff like that. That's what the Supreme Court of Canada has said. The Supreme Court of Canada has declared in rulings that that all Canadians have a right to free court interpreter services, and that recognizing these rights is consistent with a principle of natural justice. So I said, okay, this is complete violation of my rights. They chose to ignore it. The presiding judge, who was Francophone, Madame Catherine Pilon, decided to ignore it. So I then went to the Superior Court. Same thing happened. The judge and the opposing lawyer decided that they were just going to speak to each other in French against my right to a translator. Then I went to the Supreme Court of Canada and said that, okay, you know what, I want to skip the Court of Appeal of Quebec because the Quebec court system is clearly not respecting my constitutional rights. And what I wanted to say, and with that in mind, based upon previous Supreme Court decisions in terms of the right to a court interpreter in all civil, administrative, and criminal proceedings, as a result of the Supreme Court ruling, Ontario and other jurisdictions across Canada have provided Francophones and people of other language groups free corporate court interpreter services as a result of the respect by all of these court jurisdictions, except Quebec, for the right of court interpreter services. But what we have right now going on is that all these courts, Ontario, which is given, well over about $150,000, like tons and tons of hours in free court interpreter service. All these jurisdictions recognize it in Quebec. So what we have in Quebec right now is that Quebec is, apparently the court system has decided, apparently, to thumb its nose at these Supreme Court of Canada decisions, which have intended to support and to affirm the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So they have this rule that, okay, we're only going to recognize that in criminal proceedings. We're not going to recognize it in civil and administrative proceedings. So I said, okay, so what happened today in the court proceeding was, as I suspected, I told the court, that I objected to the court hearing from the Francophone lawyer, who I won't be able to respond to in French, hearing from him and denying my right to a court interpreter before the court has this opportunity of deciding upon my right to a court interpreter. Because according to Section 52 of the Constitutional Act, a judge that is confronted with unconstitutionality is obliged to recognize that unconstitutionality and strike the law down as being unconstitutional. Quebec. So I presented that to the court, and they decided that, okay, they just completely, the Court of Appeal completely ignored what I had to say about the, Supreme Court of Canada, ignored what I had to say by the Supreme, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and basically said that, okay, we have these laws in Quebec, and we don't recognize your right to a free court interpreter service, and that's it. And if you want, so they basically decided that they're only going to pay attention to Quebec laws as if Quebec is already a sovereign country, and they're not obliged to respect the same laws that other court jurisdictions across Canada have recognized and have immediately instituted appropriate measures to ensure the protection of minority language rights. As a result of this type of inequity going on with Quebec, Quebec basically pretending, and along with its court system apparently, pretending as if Quebec is a nation, a separate country, and can thumb its nose at Supreme Court of Canada, and can thumb its nose at the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, as that provincial government accepts billions and billions of dollars from Canadians, rightfully so, in my view. This is causing problems in our country. We have Quebec, Alberta wanting to separate, and a lot of separate, interest in separating, in dissolution, in the whole country imploding from a lack of direction and confidence in us being a nation. Because how can you have a nation consisting of laws that are supposed to be for everyone, while one province, again, is deciding that it's going to thumb its nose at the due process and its constitutional responsibilities? And again, this is not a question of Anglophone versus Francophone, et cetera, because I can say that a majority of we have a petition, which you can see the link below, and it's being signed by Francophones, Anglophones, and people of all backgrounds who support the just society. It is only a relatively small minority of people who profess to be who are commanding the sovereigntist movement on behalf of their symbols of the King of France, who are and on those apparently those elements of the Quebec court system which are choosing to thumb its nose at its constitutional responsibilities to affirm, the rights of all Canadians pursuant to the Supreme Court decisions, pursuant to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Is only a handful of these elites which are perpetrating disinformation about the relations that Canada has, of Canada and Quebec in relationship to each other, and by perpetrating symbols that are divisive, which are intended by an elite to exploit ideology which does not respect rights and freedoms for everyone. The same, and again, this whole bill, for example, the whole Bill 96, completely unconstitutional. It completely ignores the Section 27 of the Multiculturalism Act and ignores the official bilingualism. The notwithstanding clause cannot be used to override those two elements of the Constitution Act. So in this proceeding today, I was told that 15 minutes were going to be for the defendant, and there was supposed to be 15 minutes for me. So, I have completely objected to the opponent's lawyer being able to oppose in French. Like, how am I, if you're an Anglophone, if you don't speak French, how are you going to respond to a litigant, a lawyer who has decided to speak in French, DHC Avocat? They are completely bilingual law firm. If you go to their website, they'll have English on there and French. Back in December 2022, they started their whole presentation to me in English. Apparently, when they found out that I could speak up for myself, they decided, okay, we are not going to win this by speaking to him in English. Let's just speak in French, and that's how we're going to win this case. We just make sure that he won't understand what we're saying in court. This is a complete violation of the rights of Canadians. The whole idea that you in Quebec can experience a human rights violation, and then the opponent side simply has to address you in French and speak to you in French, and you won't understand, and you won't be denied a right to a free court interpreter as other provinces. That is completely unconstitutional. So this French lawyer, this Francophone lawyer, trying to basically, disenfranchise my rights, was allowed by the Quebec Court of Appeal against my rights to be present, but has been ruled upon by the Supreme Court of Canada. Supreme Court of Canada, on a previous decision where somebody was denied the rights of a being court interpreter, that was declared void by the Supreme Court of Canada. The Supreme Court of Canada said that, declared that, by not having a court interpreter, that's denying their rights for natural justice. So I repeated this in the court, but they ignored it. So the French, so the lawyer was allowed to say, okay, we're going to give him 15 minutes. Okay. When my 15 minute comes up, I was interrupted and prevented from talking for more than I would estimate 3 or 4 minutes. They apparently didn't like what I had to say. I was interrupted after these two quotes by, these three quotes. But one was by the Pierre Elliott Trudeau in 1968. I said that Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who founded the Charter of Rights and Freedom, declared in 1968 in front of the Liberal Convention, I believe, "For me, this rich, beautiful, and energetic country of ours can become the model of a just society in which every citizen will enjoy his fundamental rights, in which two great linguistic communities and peoples of many cultures will live in harmony. C'est ça le Canada." Then I made a quotation for Tommy Douglas, from Tommy Douglas, 1951. "My dream is for people around the world to look up and see Canada like a little jewel sitting at the top of the continent." That's what Tommy Douglas said in 1951. And then I started to make a presentation, a quotation from the Supreme Court of Canada, saying that the right of the assistance of an interpreter is a fundamental right grounded in the rules of natural justice. And it applies to accused person, but all parties in civil actions and administrative proceedings, not just for the accused in criminal proceedings. As soon as I said that, I was completely interrupted and prevented from making any further presentation because apparently the Quebec Court of Appeal, it didn't want to entertain, the direction that I was going on in terms of the speaking for the rights of all Canadians. I asserted right from the beginning that I'm there not just for myself in terms of my own action pertaining to seeking to affirm my rights in relationship to the infringements on my human rights that was recognized by the Quebec Human Rights Commission. But I'm there for all Canadians who are being disenfranchised in Quebec court system under unconstitutional law. They just simply, after minutes before saying that they were going to give me 15 minutes, decided that, I'm just going to interrupt this guy. I don't like what he's talking about, a just society for all and human rights. I don't like what he's talking about, the Supreme Court of Canada and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I'm just going to interrupt this guy and not allow him to proceed. This is the kind of outrageousness which is happening with respect to the Quebec court system, which is being emulated by the government of Quebec and its completely unconstitutional language laws, and it's completely it's completely divide and rule politics in its efforts to divide Francophones, Anglophones, and all other Canadians in a manner which is supporting the complete implosion of what we are supposed to be about as Canadians, what the Canadians who created a symbol of the Maple Leaf, the Saint Jean Baptiste Society. It was their intent to support and affirm the very words that Pierre Trudeau, said later in decades and decades and decades in the following century, 1968, when the journal Le Canadien, that was the very first newspaper in Canada. It wasn't Le Québécois, it was Le Canadien. And the motto of the Le Canadien, their whole initiative, was one which sought to affirm a sense of rights and the sense of freedoms for all people based upon the values that the embrace of North America of rights and responsibilities and freedoms and justice for all. The ideology which is apparently being espoused in Quebec today is a complete betrayal of the original identity of the French Canadians, who manifested the maple leaf in a manner which is consistent with what we have recognized the maple leaf today to be a symbol of justice, equality for everybody. So what I have to tell you today, for all my fellow Canadians out there of all backgrounds, that to give you an impression of all you Canadians who are concerned about language laws, who are concerned about justice, who have not experienced the inside of a Quebec courtroom. I am telling you, for all those Canadians out there who are simply relying on the Gazette and CBC and have a certain perception of what's going on with Quebec, but have not directly experienced a Quebec courtroom. I can tell you today, from my, based upon again the affirmation of my rights to free speech, which is recognized by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that the Quebec courtroom, the Quebec court system is no much more farther advanced than the Jim Crow, of practiced by Alabama and other southern states during the 1950s into 1960s. Not more advanced, further advanced than the apartheid era practiced into the 80s and up to the to Mandela's Nelson Mandela's reign. The whole idea of promoting a group that by derogating from the rights of others, which the Quebec court system seems to support, based upon ignoring Canadian laws, is the very rationale which was used by Jim Crow in United States, which supported segregation, and the segregationist approach in apartheid laws in South Africa, and any racist, bigoted regime that you can think of, including the practice of supporting the Aryan nation under the National Socialist government of Adolf Hitler, when he went to support the idea of the German nation needed to protect itself against all these groups that were trying to contaminate or affect the identity and the health and identity of the German nation. In the Jim Crow era, the white Southerners were concerned about their culture dying, their culture being threatened by the blacks and all these other communities. So they created Jim Crow laws in order to protect themselves, in their own estimation, themselves as white Southerners against, and to protect their way of life, supposedly. The white African population in South Africa, again, sought to promote itself by derogating the rights of others. It saw itself, the white Afrikaans saw itself as that they needed to protect their language, their way of life, from all the Africanization of their society. So they created apartheid laws to protect their way of life. Similarly, we have a system that's being supported by the Legault government, that has sought to, in the same way that the southern states sought to thumb its nose at the U.S. Constitution and the rights and liberties which are supposed to be guaranteed to all Americans. We have the government of Quebec and its the Quebec provincial court system. In the same way, the Jim Crow, the state court systems of the under Jim Crow sought to thumb its nose in the United States Constitution and enforce the racist laws that were being passed under Jim Crow in states like Alabama, is the same thing that's going on, with history repeating itself, where we have the Quebec court system, same way Alabama and these other southern states during the 1950s, seeking to uphold unconstitutional laws by pretending the national constitution does not exist, and allowing representation in a way inconsistent with natural justice, allowing representation designed to enforce and uphold unjust laws. This is what we have going on in Quebec. The laws are unconstitutional, language laws. It's inconsistent with natural justice, and the Quebec court system is completely derogating from its responsibilities to uphold and recognize immediately the Constitution, the Canadian Constitution and the Supreme Court of Canada. Today, when they allowed the opponent to present in French in a manner which I cannot understand, and then said, "Oh, what do you have to say?" This judge is expecting me to now reply to representation I cannot understand, and he knows that. This whole process of unfairness going on in Quebec, which is being upheld and supported by the Quebec court system, is a conscious process. Like a reasonable person could understand that you cannot go to somebody and speak to them in a language they don't understand and expect them to be able to give a substantive reply. This is the kind of orchestrated process that we have going on in Quebec. So we have in Quebec a system that is entrenching and supporting unfairness that is being enforced, and this unfairness is being enforced by the Quebec court system. So the whole process is unconstitutional. So in response to this whole complete process today, which was completely unconstitutional, doesn't recognize apparently the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, doesn't recognize the Supreme Court of decisions, that is trying to derogate from its responsibilities as a court to protect the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms at all times. I will be, and we will be, as whoever wants to join in this process, be making a leave to appeal to the Canadian Supreme Court regarding this complete affront by the Quebec justice system to derogate from the rights and freedoms of all Canadians. This is completely unfair. And again, the majority of Francophones, Anglophones, Canadians of all backgrounds support a just society for all. But what we have is basically a well-placed minority in the Quebec system, in the judicial system, who are in the Quebec government, who are in the police system that was subject to my original complaint. The police, the judiciary, and the governmental authorities, these elites, are working together to subvert the whole ideal of what we stand up for as Canadians. We stand up as Canadians for justice for all, and these are the values which our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms espouse. And is my responsibility as a Canadian to, as someone who has a knowledge of constitutional rights and affairs and how the legal system works, to oppose this kind of unfairness that is being propped up by again, a handful of elites working in collaboration with each other, apparently, in the judicial system, among the police, among the government system. They are seeking to reinforce in Quebec an unjust environment and to perpetuate that by preventing and frustrating the ability of Canadians who have experienced human rights infringements and who have experienced all sorts of injustices to frustrate the ability of Canadians to access their rights that are guaranteed by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms pursuant to Section 24, subsection 1, gives Canadians the rights to make an appeal, to apply to a court of competent jurisdiction in order to seek judicial relief. How can Canadians who do not speak French in Quebec apply for judicial relief when their very basis of being able to make an application, which is their ability to understand the language of court proceedings, is being denied by the Quebec court system, which is seeking to ignore, apparently, the decisions of the Quebec of the Canadian Supreme Court and its Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which have been recognized in other parts of Canada. This idea that Quebec can simply pretend to be to pursue reckless policies which infringe on rights. This idea that Quebec can do this as if it's some separate entity that is not a part of Confederate. This idea that Quebec can do this and that the rest of Canada plays by the rules, but Quebec doesn't have to play by the rules. They can just create these sort of Jim Crow apartheid policies designed to divide and rule and conquer Francophones and Anglophones and other people in Quebec to exploit their sovereigntist, oppressive, mindset, which is manifested in their symbol of autocracy and authoritarianism, which is presented to us in plain sight through the fleur-de-lis as the symbol of the kings of France and the symbol of Roman Catholicism that existed before the Quiet Revolution, when Quebec was a particularly oppressive society to everyone before the Quiet Revolution. I invite all Canadians who are concerned about this, all Canadians who want to rally in support of our sense of identity as Canadians, who support rights, freedoms, and justice for all, which is the rallying cry of the Saint Jean Baptiste Society in 1834, the rallying cry of our first newspaper in Canada, Le Canadien, the rallying cry of Francophones and all Canadians. I invite Canadians who are listening to this, who are concerned about the kind of atrocities, the outrageousness, the complete outrageousness which is being propped up by the Quebec court system. I invite you to sign the petition below and to get involved in our appeal to the leave to appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada. We made we presented a leave to appeal before. The Supreme Court of Canada said want of jurisdiction, but now the Quebec Court of Appeal is going to be rendering its decision, which is based upon which is in my view completely void. As I told the court today, the decision is completely constitutionally voidable because it completely derogated from my ability to have the recognition that I have be present through natural rights. You cannot have the judge and the opposing lawyer talking in French in a way that I can understand and then expecting me to reply to that. The Supreme Court of Canada has already decided that that's against natural justice, and but again, Quebec as a law unto itself doesn't want to recognize that, and simply so we are now in a position of being able to needing to make an imminent appeal to expose to the Supreme Court of Canada the type of nonsense, the type of outrageousness that the Quebec court system is seeking to prop up, which is consistent with the type of Jim Crow practices by the state of Alabama and all those states that elected to support Jim Crow against the U.S. Constitution. We are having a sort of a repeat of that by Quebec ignoring the Canadian, apparently through this court system, ignoring the rights of Canadians, ignoring the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms in favor of Quebec laws, which are completely unconstitutional, and then denying the ability of non-francophones to be able to reply to a motion because they cannot understand. I mean, this is a bilingual law firm, DHC Avocats, but again, they said all the representation to me in French intentionally because in order to deny access to justice, all representation by this law firm, DHC Avocats, were made to me in French. They came with a game plan today of making their whole presentation in French, so I could not understand. And this complete, constitutionally invalid process was propped up and supported by the Quebec Court of Appeal judges under the code of ethics of the code of ethics for lawyers. The Code of Ethics of Lawyers, if I can get that right now, for the Quebec, looking at the Code of Professional Conduct of Lawyers, Act Respect, Chapter C26, sections 87 and 89, I believe. Access to justice is supposed to be upheld by by Quebec lawyers, but apparently, how can you have access to justice? How can Quebec lawyers be supporting access to justice when they, in fact, refuse to present any materials or to present their case in the language of the opposing litigant as officers of the court? So again, the Quebec Court of Appeal being and apparently, not recognizing even laws which are there in Quebec, which are inconsistent with the practice of ignoring non-francophones, they just simply don't acknowledge access to justice. Again, the Canadian Judicial Council, integrity and respect. In Section 2 of the Canadian Judicial Council, the ethics, which is basically ethical principle of judges. Judges foster access to justice for all. So we have in the Canadian the Canadian Judicial Council's ethical principle of judges, that judges are required to foster access and justice for all. We have in the Code of Professional Conduct of Lawyers for Quebec, lawyers are supposed to facilitate access to justice of all. But again, when something like this, when it would have to be a law in Quebec, which supports the minority rights, they just simply apparently ignore it. We're not going to support that. We are a francophone court. We don't have any obligations to you non-francophones of supporting your access to justice. We're just going to accept and ignore certain rules that support our legally enforced ideology, which we're seeking to uphold. I mean, this is what's going on here. This is completely unconstitutional, and a complete violation of standards of fairness. Again, the fairness and integrity of the process, in terms of from a standpoint of Quebec court system, made it incumbent upon them to recognize that I could not understand the language that's being used by the opposing lawyer, and to allow and to review it, to recognize the Supreme Court decisions, that I have a right to access free court interpreter services based upon the decisions, and to enable that, and to allow me to understand what was being said. But they just simply said, okay, we're not going to ignore that. we're just going to allow the opposing side to make a presentation in a language that we know you won't understand. And that's the way we work it in Quebec. And we apparently don't care about what the Supreme Court of Canada says. We don't care about your Charter of Rights and Freedoms because we are the kings of France. We support, we support a Bourbon authoritarian autocracy where we don't have to be concerned about democracy and rights and freedoms. We are just going to rule as if we are back in the 17th or 18th century, back in the court of the kings of France. We are just going to rule based upon authority of the kings of France. We're not going to, and our ideology, we're not going to rule in support of the fundamental principles of law and justice and due process. We're not going to allow you a free court interpreter serve. We're just going to proceed, and we know that you're not going to understand what is being said, but this is how we do work it in Quebec. This is what happened today. So anybody, again, if you're concerned about language laws and what's happening in Quebec, I want everybody today to get to have an insider's perspective of what is going on, why we are at the stage right now where, as a confederation, we support ideals. The ideal of Canada is what Pierre-Elliott Trudeau said: a society where we can live together, a bilingual and multicultural society where everybody gets along side by side, respecting each other's equality and rights, and to be a model society of justice for all. Again, for all the Francophones that have been supporting our petition, and for a majority Francophones, I could say, and Canadians in general, these are the values that we support. We support the values, again, which was endorsed by the Saint Jean Baptiste Society, that shows their maple leaf as a symbol. That is what we support. We don't support an ideology of the kings of France and the Virgin Mary and the oppressive symbols of the Roman Catholic Church, which have manifested in the fleur-de-lis today. We don't support these types of values which derogate from Indigenous rights and derogate from the languages of other people. We support the promotion of the French language. We support the promotion of the French culture, but not any sort of ideological framework where it seeks to supposedly support one group at the expense of denying the rights of others. And this is what is going on in Quebec. This is against what we stand up for. There has been no leadership by the federal government on this, because I can tell you, in the Canada, if Pierre-Elliott Trudeau was still prime minister, he would not be standing up for this kind of nonsense which is going on. There's been an absence of leadership. The federal government under our prime minister is allowing Canada to implode under an environment of inequity, where the West is seeing this going on. Alberta and the Western provinces seeing this inequity going on, fostering separatist movements over there. We see people in Ontario see this unfairness going on. And all this unfairness, all it does, it fosters a sense of alienation against Francophones, and which it shouldn't be fostering a sense of alienation against Francophones, because Francophones have been the greatest champions of rights, including Pierre-Elliott Trudeau, including Wilfrid Laurier. These are the people who have supported the rights for all Canadians. And we have this environment right now where we as Canadians want to live together without this sense that, because you can support the French language and the French culture without derogating the rights of others. And in the process of doing so, that will promote the French language, because people, rather than seeing French as being forced in a way which is inconsistent with their human rights, will see French as a positive symbol of affirming rights and freedoms for everyone. That is how you promote the French language. You promote it by the sense of the sense of spirit, the sense of generosity. This is what characterizes francophones in Canada, not this evil, wicked, oppressive mentality, which is running Quebec these days through their judiciary, through their police forces, through their government systems. If you look at these government systems, for example, you can see right from the start that, we just want to promote the French language. You can tell that this is complete bunkum. You can tell this is complete propaganda, because if you look at the Quebec police, how many minorities do you see? There are a lot of minorities in Quebec who speak French. Black people, Asian people, Indian people. There are a lot of people who speak French, who have different backgrounds in Quebec. How many of these people are getting promoted in the Quebec police forces like Ville de Gatineau? How many of them do you see if you're in Quebec that are visible minorities? How many people do you see in the Quebec government? These people who are supporting these divisive policies in the Legault government. These divisive policies. How many minorities do you see among them? How many minorities do you see in the Quebec judiciary, which is propping up these offensive, constitutionally offensive policies? If you look at the Quebec Superior Court, if you look at the Court of Appeal, I invite you to look at the justices there, examine who they are, look at their name, look and see how many minorities you see there, how many people that represent the diversity, which is supposed to represent Quebec today. I ask you to look at that and then compare that to the justices and the courts in Ontario. Compare that to the police forces in Ottawa. Compare that to the police forces in Toronto. Compare that to these corresponding institutions in the rest of Canada who embraced the diversity, which includes francophones. They embraced people of all backgrounds in the rest of Canada, and this is what their court systems have sought to entrench in the rest of Canada. You go to Quebec, they say, we're just trying to promote these elites. We're just wanting to promote the French language. Then you see who's the ones doing the talking. Who are the people who are oppressing the rights of other minorities? Who are they? They're not the minorities of themselves, because the minorities themselves who speak French are not giving it a chance to represent the modern Quebec, which Montrealers support in Montreal. This is why Montreal is being demonized. Montrealers recognize more than anybody that French can happily coexist in an enriching environment of many peoples, of many backgrounds, can live side by side together while promoting the French language. This is what Montrealers know about. They know that the society, that their environment is enriched by the presence of all these groups. I don't know of any Montrealer which thinks that we're not appreciative of the diversity around us. That's why people move to Montreal. They embrace the diversity. Somehow Montreal is being demonized again by these elites, which want to demonize it because they're using this excuse of promoting the language of the French language as an excuse to hide behind their agenda, which is not to promote the French language, but to entrench their sense of what Quebec is, their face of Quebec, which is certain elites having control of the society and in an authoritarian, autocratic way, and repressing anybody who does not support their little closed circuit version of Quebec. This is what is going on in the Quebec. A closed circuit elites in judiciary, in the the police systems, in the government systems, wanting to demonize Montreal because they don't like that. They don't like that kind of environment. They don't like all these, these people of different backgrounds. And what are these people? So they are a threat to us. We are threatened by young people saying things in English. We are threatened by that. We want to create this facade of what we are supposed to be about. An artificial facade they are trying to create, a legally enforced artificial facade, in the same way that the Afrikaans were trying to do in South Africa under apartheid, that the white South Africans and as well the same kind of facade that the Jim Crow Southerners in Alabama and Georgia and those other southern states, the same type of facade they're about. They are seeking to. So anytime you have an environment which seeks to promote itself, we are concerned about the survival of our culture. Let's derogate from other people's rights. That type of society is an authoritarian, autocratic, oppressive, or dictatorial society, inconsistent with rights, and they are simply trying to exploit fear in the society, fear among a group that is going to lose its identity by being exposed to and be recognizing the rights of others. They are trying to facilitate and enforce control. Their focus is not to promote the Quebec language, the French language in Canada or Quebec. Their focus is to control everybody in an oppressive society of their own vision, and to recognize and to simply ignore any of their own laws which derogate from their perception that a certain group should have control, and this is our society, and we don't like you, and we're going to choose to ignore you and any rules. So this is not due process. This is not constitutional law. This is not the values that we support as a whole, as a Canadian society. And if we are, as a Canadian society, to save ourselves, save our country, support the ideals that were espoused, that I believe that the majority of us support, it is vital that we today rally around the cry and the ideals of Pierre Elliott Trudeau. I mean, there's a lot of people don't like Pierre Elliott Trudeau. There's a positive and a negative. But what he said in 1968, for anybody who's just joining us today, 1968, this is what we need to assert. We cannot allow our society our Canadian society to implode. We cannot, simply because of the type of unconstitutional, irresponsible, outrageous conduct of elites in Quebec, which violate our sense of who we are as Canadians. We cannot allow the greatness of our society to be denigrated in this manner by elites which seek to exploit us, that seek to divide and rule and conquer us, which seek to exploit fear among Francophones, to seek to support symbols of racism, symbols of oppression, symbols of authoritarianism. We cannot allow ourselves to the greatness of what our society is about, to be further denigrated. I feel for the people in Alberta and the people in the rest of the other parts of Western Canada who are frustrated, who want to separate. Of course, you would want to separate in an environment which allows the type of outrageousness going on in Quebec. This is understandable. It's understandable why people who have succumbed to the politics and divide and rules, why you have an environment where of fear, where people think that as soon as they see a Francophone, oh yeah, they're this and that and that. Then as soon as the Francophone sees an Anglophone, oh yeah, they're trying to oppress me, etc., etc., etc. We as a Canada, again, we need to go beyond this type of mentality, which is this mischievous environment which is being fostered, which starts from what is going on in Quebec. What is going on in Quebec today is the pivotal source of all kinds of problems going on in society right now. We have an environment where it's like it's similar to, you have a system where, I mean, many people are talking about, okay, it's like you keep arming a side, which is practicing injustice, and all it does is embolden them to practice more injustice. So we have a system where, okay, the federal government is not going to comment on the obligations of Quebec to respect confederations. They're just going to simply, keep giving them money for these elites. And then what's happening is that the people of Quebec, which are dependent on, job and what their view of prosperity is, they end up getting disenfranchised because the response by corporations and small businesses is to leave Quebec. And so rather than the federal government take responsibility and stand up for Canadians and prevent this type of nonsense from going on, they just simply ignore it. They don't make a comment. Justin Trudeau doesn't want to get involved in so-called constitutional issues. And we have Quebec continuing to disregard fundamental rights and freedoms. With point blank, I mean, it's just astonishing today. You read off right in front of the Quebec Court of Appeal judge. You read off exactly word by word what the Supreme Court of Canada Justice says. Oh, they're just ignored. Just don't even. You read what the law is right in front of them. They just ignore it, and then they just cut you off. Oh, we don't want to hear from you anymore. You're speaking things which are inconsistent with with our view of supporting, et cetera, et cetera. We're not going to listen to you anymore. So this is exactly the type of atrocity. So I would like to wrap up my presentation today again with the Pierre Elliott Trudeau's pivotal words in 1968. Again, for me, this rich, beautiful, and energetic country of ours can become the model of a just society in which every citizen will enjoy his fundamental rights, in which two great linguistic communities and peoples of many cultures will live in harmony. C'est ça le Canada. I invite any Canadians, and all Canadians who hear this broadcast, to not only sign a petition, but get involved. Because I promise you, the more people who get involved, the more people the Supreme Court of Canada see who's being completely outraged by these type of the activities taking place and is being fostered and endorsed by the Quebec court system. I invite you to get involved, because together we can make a difference. Together we can restore the sense of Canada championed by our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We can restore the sense of Canada affirmed by a Supreme Court of Canada. We can restore the Canada that Tommy Douglas sought to champion, a light in the beacon of a beacon for all people in the world to see. We can, if we come together and move beyond this type of, and appreciate that we are being subjected to a strategy of divide, rule, and conquer that seeks to divide Francophones and Anglophones and everybody, all people in our great multicultural society. We can appreciate that we are being subjected to a cynical strategy reinforced by the Quebec court system, and challenge that in the Supreme Court of Canada. We can challenge and these fundamental laws in Quebec, these laws in Quebec, which are these language laws, which are completely ridiculous, which are completely unconstitutional. Together, we can challenge these language laws. We can restore a Canada which is supported by the majority of Francophones, where we promote the French language as a part of our officially bilingual framework, that we support the French language, that we promote it amongst, as much as we can. We promote it, but not at the cost of derogating from the fundamental rights of people to affirm their human rights on other rights. We cannot afford that, because when any society chooses to promote itself by derogating for the rights of others, that is not democracy. That is not a constitutional society. That is not a society that supports rights and freedoms. That is a society that supports shades of authoritarianism, an autocratic society, or a totalitarian society, or a dictatorial society. Again, those are the apparent values of that is being championed by the elites of Quebec today. And as Canadians, let us work together to through a collective appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada and champion the Just Society for All, and let us begin this process by championing a Just Society for All by collectively expressing our resolve against this type of injustices, this type of outrageous conduct that is happening in Quebec, where they simply bold-faced right in front of you, you can read out what the law is, and they just completely ignored. They just say, oh, well, this is Quebec, we can do whatever we want. Let us work together and challenge this type of inequity going on, because together we can make a difference. The United States is showing us what happens when people come together and sought to challenge the iniquitous Jim Crow practices of Alabama and other southern states. People came together, went to the Supreme Court of United States and challenged this. And thankfully today, the United States has, since the 1960s, has been freed from Jim Crow, and this is the type of this is the type of approach was used in South Africa to challenge the apartheid system. Together, let us work together to challenge for all Canadians, no matter if you don't even are not that interested in language laws in particular. I suggest to you that the language laws that are happening in Quebec is pivot for anybody who is concerned about whether it's poverty, social injustices at all levels. The language laws that are going in Quebec is fundamentally atrocious. And if we can redress that, if we can come together as Canadians and put an end to these unconstitutional laws that the Quebec court system is propping up, that's allowing human rights to challenges to go completely unrecognized in the face of opponents which choose opponent law firms like DHC Avocat, which chooses to use French to derogate and to disenfranchise the rights of other people, even though they're bilingual law firm. I invite Canadians of all persuasions who support a justice society to come together and work towards stopping and challenging these fundamentalist laws, because I can tell you, if we can work together and redress and to get rid of these ridiculous Bill 96 and unconstitutional laws which declare that French to be the common language, and we're just going to ignore Indigenous people, we're just going to ignore everybody else's rights, and even though and we're going to call it, we're trying to promote the French language, even though it's not to promote the French language, but just to derogate from everybody's rights, to create an artificial facade of the society propped up by authoritarianism. And we can work together and challenge and repeal what's going on in Quebec through the Supreme Court of Canada. It will provide us, in my humble opinion, with the momentum to challenge and defend a just society at all levels of Canada. Unfortunately, today, as Canadians, we are this language laws. This is become so outrageous that is creating a complete divisiveness in Canada, a complete divisionist paralysis. The federal government is not taking any lead, and the lack of leadership in the federal government on language laws is replete, not just on language laws, but on all levels of Canadian society. They are just simply wanting to repeat the same old propagandist lines just in Trudeau government, the same old lines that it thinks is going to get it elected, while ignoring the fundamental the fundamental inequality, inequity, and injustices which are taking place in this country. We can come together and challenge what is going on in Quebec. we can begin to restore confidence in Western Canada, Ontario, and all parts of Canada that this is what Canada is. We as Canadians are expect that all provinces of the Confederation to respect fundamental laws. This is what Western Canada wants. This is what all Canadians want. And if we can come together rather than succumbing to this type of national alienation, thanks to these outrageousness going on in Quebec, let's come together. Let's challenge these. Let's restore equality for all provinces. Let's get rid of these through the Supreme Court of Canada. This ridiculousness of what I call Jim Crow edition 2 going on in Quebec. Let us redress that. And once we get to the stage where these laws are put to rest and are challenged and are ruled unconstitutional and having no place in Quebec, no place in Canada, once we can challenge that successfully, we will have and restore faith in all parts of the country that we are a society which stands for rights for everybody, just society for all, no matter what your background is. This is what Canada is. Canada is not one set of rules for one group, and Quebec pursuing some authoritarian, autocratic agenda through its court system. We can come together and challenge this, then we will have the momentum of affirming the types of society, the ideals spoke by Pierre Elliott Trudeau when he spoke those words in 1968, when Tommy Douglas spoke those words in 1951, for those Canadians who are having a sense of alienation, who are feeling that Canada is not living up to what it should be. Let us work together to restore your faith in Canada, and let's work together with this through starting with challenging these unconstitutional laws in Quebec. Let's just use this as the first test of our resolve that yes, we will not be divided by Quebec's elites. We will come together as Canadians and use the same resolve as we Canadians came together in the War of 1812, the same resolve that Canadians came together to defend rights and freedoms during World War II and World War I, the same resolve that Canadians used to vote against the referendum in Quebec and for Canada. Let's come together, let's renew that consensus and defend our sense of rights and freedoms in Canada. And I invite you to, again, join our petitions below, circulate this video, let us work together to affirm the sense of Canada that is articulated by the Canadian Supreme Court of Canada through its decisions that has sought to enforce our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Let's not allow this type of nonsense, this type of offenses that are going against the Canadian rights and Canadian sense of values. Let us not allow this type of offenses to continue by elites which are seeking to pursue an agenda which is inconsistent with our sense of sensibilities, our sense of rights and freedoms that the majority of Canadians defend. So thank you very much today for listening to me. Thank you very much today for listening to my lucid presentation of my experience of the my perception of the process which came from the motion of the Quebec Court of Appeal, the motion presented by the opposing side. You know, this again is I'm giving you my lucid presentation of that it was completely a constitutionally deficient process that must be challenged. And again, I'm here to defend and advocate and support the rights of all Canadians. And I invite any Canadians who feel a sense of moral indignation of what I've had to hear presented today. I invite you to get involved. Let us work together, and let's work for the Canada of our dreams. Let's work for the Canada that supports a just society for everyone. And let's work against these type of, let's start our road to affirming our sense of Canadian values, affirming our Canadian identity as a multicultural society, a bilingual society that supports rights and freedoms. Let us work together to support the Canada of our dreams. That's well within there's well within the possibilities if we can work together, and starting with challenging the language laws in Quebec, which if they go unchallenged, in my concern, will lead to the complete dissolution of Canada, the complete destruction and implosion of Canada. Our sense of we need to stop that right now, and we need to come together and challenge this type of bold-faced, unconstitutional actions which are going in Quebec, which are completely in violation, again, Supreme Court of Canada decisions and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Quebec can no longer pretend to be a sovereign country and to do whatever it wants under some autocratic, authoritarian banner. And then, this is completely outrageous what's going on. So again, thank you very much for taking the time to listen and support our petition below, circulate this video below, and together let's work to make Canada a strong and united country that all Canadians, of whether you're from the West, Ontario, the Atlantic Canada, the North, Indigenous communities, no matter what your background is, let us work together to build the Canada of our dreams and not succumb to the divide and rule and politics of the Quebec elite, with their actions that are subversive to our sense of values of Canadian society. So thank you very much again today.